I'm going to be waiting for a few people to join the room, and then I shall get started. Five, four, three, two, one. Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. The copy that I'm reading from was printed in 2003. And I'm going to start by reading from the author's preface to the original edition. And then I'm going to go on to read chapter 1 after that. My name is Holly Maxwell Boydell, and I am going to be reading through from this book this evening. And I won't be pinging anyone up onto the stage because this is purely to listen. Author's preface to the original edition of Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. Every chapter of this book mentions the money-making secret that has made fortunes for more than 500 exceedingly wealthy people, whom I have carefully analyzed over a long period of years. The secret was brought to my attention more than a quarter of a century ago by Andrew Carnegie. The canny, lovable old Scotsman carelessly tossed it into my mind when I was but a boy. Then he sat back in his chair with a merry twinkle in his eyes and watched carefully to see if I had brains enough to understand the full significance of what he had said to me. When he saw that I had grasped the idea, he asked if I would be willing to spend 20 years or more preparing myself to take it to the world, to men and women who, without the secret, might go through life as failures. I said I would, and with Mr. Carnegie's cooperation, I have kept my promise. This book contains the secret, which has been put to a practical test by thousands of people from almost every walk of life. It was Mr. Carnegie's idea that the magic formula, which gave him a stupendous fortune, ought to be placed within reach of people who do not have the time to investigate how people make money. He hoped that I might test and demonstrate the soundness of the formula through the experience of men and women in every calling. He believed the formula should be taught in all schools and colleges, and expressed the opinion that if it were properly taught, it would so revolutionize the entire educational system that the time spent in school could be reduced to less than half. His experience with Charles M. Schwab and other young men of Mr. Schwab's type convinced Mr. Carnegie that much of what is taught in schools is of no value whatsoever in connection with the business of earning a living or accumulating riches. He arrived at this decision having taken into his business one young man after another, many with little schooling, and developed in them rare leadership by coaching them in the use of this formula. Moreover, his coaching made fortunes for every one of them who followed his instructions. In the chapter on faith, you will read the astounding story of how the formula was applied to the organization of the giant United States Steel Corporation. It was conceived and carried out by one of the young men through whom Mr. Carnegie proved that his formula will work for all who are ready for it. This single application of the secret by that young man, Charles M. Schwab, made him a huge fortune in both money and opportunity. Roughly speaking, this particular application of the formula was worth $600 million. These facts, and they are facts well known to almost everyone who knew Mr. Carnegie, give you a fair idea of what the reading of this book may bring to you, provided you know what you want. Even before it had undergone 20 years of practical testing, the secret was passed on to more than 100,000 men and women who have used it for their personal benefit, as Mr. Carnegie planned that they should. Some have made fortunes with it. Others have used it successfully in creating harmony in their homes. The secret to which I refer has been mentioned no fewer than 100 times throughout this book. It has not been directly named, for it seems to work more successfully when it is merely uncovered and left in sight, where those who are ready and searching for it may pick it up. That is why Mr. Carnegie tossed it to me so quietly, without giving me its specific name. If you are ready to put it to good use, you will recognize this secret at least once in every chapter. I wish I could tell you how you will know if you're ready, but that would deprive you of much of the benefit you will receive when you make the discovery in your own way. While this book was being written, my own son, who was then finishing the last year of his college work, picked up the manuscript of chapter 2, read it, and discovered the secret for himself. He used the information so effectively that he went directly into a responsible position at a starting salary greater than the average man ever earns. His story has been briefly described in chapter 2, and when you read it, perhaps you will dismiss any feeling you may have had at the beginning of the book that it promised too much. And 2, if you've ever been discouraged, if you've had difficulties to surmount, which took the very soul out of you, if you have tried and failed, if you were ever handicapped by illness or physical affliction, this story of my son's discovery and use of the Carnegie formula may prove to be the oasis in the desert of lost hope for which you have been searching. This secret was extensively used by President Woodrow Wilson during World War I. It was passed on to every soldier who fought in the war, carefully wrapped in the training received before going to the front. President Wilson told me it was a strong factor in raising the funds needed for war. Early in the 20th century, Manuel L. Quezon, then resident commissioner of the Philippine Islands, was inspired by the secret to gain freedom for his people and went on to lead them as its first president. A peculiar thing about this secret is that those who acquire it and use it find themselves literally swept on to success with but little effort, and they never again submit to failure. If you doubt this, study the names and records of those who've used it, wherever they have been mentioned, and be convinced. There is no such thing as something for nothing. The secret to which I refer cannot be had without a price, although the price is far less than its value. Those who are not intentionally searching for it cannot have it at any price. It cannot be given away. It cannot be purchased for money because it comes in 2 parts. One part is already in possession of those who are ready for it. The secret serves equally well all who are ready for it. Education has nothing to do with it. Long before I was born, the secret had found its way into the possession of Thomas A. Edison, and he used it so intelligently that he became the world's leading inventor, although he had but 3 months of schooling. The secret was passed on to a business associate of Mr. Edison. He used it so effectively that although he was then making only $12,000 a year, he accumulated a great fortune and retired from active business while still a young man. You will find his story at the beginning of the first chapter. It should convince you that riches are not beyond your reach, that you can still be what you wish to be, that money, fame, recognition, and happiness can be had by all who are ready and determined to have these blessings. How do I know these things? You should have the answer before you finish this book. You may find it in the very first chapter or on the last page. While I was performing the 20-year task of research, which I had undertaken at Mr. Carnegie's request, I analyzed hundreds of well-known men, many of whom admitted that they'd accumulated their vast fortunes through the aid of the Carnegie secret. Among these men were Henry Ford, Theodore Roosevelt, William Wrigley, John Wanamaker, James J. Hill, Wilbur Wright, William Jennings Bryan, Woodrow Wilson, William Howard Taft, Albert H. Gray, King Gillette, Alexander Graham Bell, John D. Rockefeller, Thomas A. Edison, F.W. Woolworth, Clarence Darrow. These names represent but a small fraction of the hundreds of well-known Americans whose achievements financially and otherwise prove that those who understand and apply the Carnegie secret reach high stations in life. All the people I have known who have been inspired to use the secret have achieved noteworthy success in their chosen calling. I have never known any person to distinguish himself or to accumulate riches of any consequence without possession of the secret. From these two facts, I draw the conclusion that the secret is more important as a part of the knowledge essential for self-determination than anything one receives through what is popularly known as education. What is education anyway? As far as schooling is concerned, many of these men had very little. John Wanamaker once told me that what little schooling he had, he acquired in very much the same manner as a locomotive takes on water, by scooping it up as it runs. Henry Ford never reached high school, let alone college. I'm not attempting to minimize the value of schooling, but I am trying to express my earnest belief that those who master and apply the secret will reach high stations, accumulate riches, and bargain with life on their own terms, even if their schooling has been meager. Somewhere, as you read, the secret to which I refer will jump from the page and stand boldly before you, if you're ready for it. Where it appears, you will recognize it. Whether you receive the sign in the first or the last chapter, stop for a moment when it presents itself and raise your glass to toast your epiphany. Chapter 1 tells the story of my very dear friend who has generously acknowledged having seen the mystic sign and whose business achievements are evidence enough that he turned down a glass. As you read his story and the others, remember that they deal with the important problems of life, such as all people experience. The problems arising from one's endeavor to earn a living, to find hope, courage, contentment, and peace of mind, to accumulate riches, and to enjoy freedom of body and spirit. Remember too, as you go through the book, that it deals with facts and not with fiction. Its purpose is to convey a great universal truth through which all who are ready may learn not only what to do, but also how to do it and receive the needed stimulus to make a start. As a final word of preparation, may I offer one brief suggestion that may provide a clue to recognizing the Carnegie secret. It is this: all achievement, all earned riches, you already possess one half of it. Therefore, you will readily recognize the other half the moment it reaches your mind. Napoleon Hill, 1937. I just want to take a moment to welcome all who are in the room right now with me. I'm Holly Maxwell Boydell, and you're really welcome. We've had friends popping in and out, and I am reading through Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. I have just read the author's preface to the original edition. Now I'm going to read the preface to the current edition, and then I'm going to read chapter 1. And that's probably where I'll stop for this evening. And I will be continuing with my book readings next Saturday. So do stay with me, and if you'd like to ping anyone else into the room, that would be wonderful. I would love to have your help to bring in a greater audience, but in the meantime, do sit back and enjoy what you hear. Preface to the current edition, and this one is written by Dr. Arthur R. Pell in 2004. When Think and Grow Rich was published in 1937, it was acclaimed as one of the great inspirational books of its time. Together with Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People, and Norman Vincent Peale's book, The Power of Positive Thinking, it became essential reading for women and men who pursued success in their lives and careers. Over 15 million copies of this book have been sold. It became a roadmap for many millions of people to escape the poverty of the Depression era and gain prosperity for themselves, their families, and in many cases, their employees. Who was Napoleon Hill, and what was the source of his philosophy? Napoleon Hill was born into a poor family in 1883 in a one-room cabin in rural Virginia. He was orphaned at the age of 12 and brought up by his relatives. Overcoming poverty and his rebellious nature, he struggled to obtain an education and developed into one of the pragmatic geniuses of his time. Age 13, he started his writing career as a stringer for small-town newspapers, a reporter who wrote items and stories about happenings in his area for pennies a line. Perhaps because of his own struggle to overcome poverty, he became obsessed with why people fail to achieve true financial success and happiness in their lives. To earn a living, he chose to pursue careers in both law and journalism. His early career as a reporter helped finance his way through law school. His big break came when he was given an assignment to write a series of success stories of famous men. One of the men he interviewed for this series was Andrew Carnegie, the world-renowned steel magnate. Mr. Carnegie was so impressed by the young journalist that he gave him a commission that would dominate the next 25 years of Hill's life. The project was to interview over 500 millionaires to find a success formula that could be used by the average person. The interviewees included the greatest and wealthiest men of the era. Among them were Thomas Edison, Alexander Graham Bell, Henry Ford, Charles M. Schwab, Theodore Roosevelt, William Wrigley, John Wanamaker, William Jennings Bryan, George Eastman, Woodrow Wilson, William H. Taft, John D. Rockefeller, F. W. Woolworth, and many others who are not as well known today. During this period, Andrew Carnegie became Hill's mentor, helping Hill formulate a philosophy of success, drawing on the thoughts and experiences of the people who were interviewed. The success of Think and Grow Rich led to a long career as consultant to business leaders, lecturer and writer of several more books, and made Hill a millionaire in his own right. Napoleon Hill died in November 1970 after a long and successful career. His work stands as a guidepost to individual achievement and has influenced readers for almost 70 years. Updating a classic work is a monumental task. The basic philosophy of the writer cannot be changed. It must always be Napoleon Hill's book, not mine. I approached it in the same way an art restorer looks at a classic painting that is being refurbished. I carefully studied the text and deleted stories and anecdotes that, although meaningful to the reader of the 1930s, have little significance to the reader of the 21st century. I replaced them with examples and illustrations of men and women who, in their careers in recent times, exemplify the principles Napoleon Hill promulgated. In the following chapters, you will learn these principles. In addition to reading the success stories of the people Hill studied for the original book, you will meet some of the top achievers of our time, such as Bill Gates, Mary Kay Ash, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Ray Kroc, Michael Jordan, and others. Napoleon Hill's proven steps to riches are as valid for today's reader as they were for his contemporaries. All who read, understand, and apply this philosophy will be better prepared to attract and enjoy these higher standards of living that always have been and always will be denied to all except those who are ready for them. Be prepared, therefore, when you actively follow Napoleon Hill's precepts, to make major changes in your approach to life. It will pay off in enabling you to enjoy a life of harmony and understanding, as well as setting the stage for you to join the ranks of wealthy people. And that chapter was written by Dr. Arthur R. Pell in 2004. And it's the preface to the current edition of Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. My name's Holly Maxwell Boydell, and I am reading to you from Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. And I'm about to read chapter 1. So just to take a quick drink break and to ask any of the audience if you would like to ping others into the room so that we can give them a chance to hear this as well. It's a very, very special book, and it's such a pleasure to be able to read out loud and share this with you all. If you'd like to look around the room at who else is in the room and see who you might like to follow, that's always a good thing. And by all means, please do go to my bio and note there what you might like to take an interest in, and we can connect that way as well. Chapter 1 of Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. The title of this chapter is The Power of Thought. The man who thought his way into partnership with Thomas A. Edison. Truly, thoughts are things, and powerful things at that. When mixed with purpose, persistence, and a burning desire for their translation into riches or other material objects. Edwin C. Barnes discovered how true it is that men really do think and grow rich. His discovery did not come about at one sitting. It came little by little, beginning with a burning desire to become a business associate of the great Thomas Edison. One of the chief characteristics of Barnes's desire was that it was definite. He wanted to work with Edison, not for him. Observe carefully the description of how he went about translating his desire into reality, and you will have a better understanding of the 13 principles which lead to riches. When this desire or impulse of thought first flashed into his mind, he was in no position to act upon it. Two difficulties stood in his way. He did not know Mr. Edison, and he did not have enough money to pay his rail fare to Orange, New Jersey. These difficulties were sufficient to have discouraged the majority of people from making any attempt to carry out the desire. But his was no ordinary desire. He was so determined to find a way to carry out his desire that he finally decided to travel by blind baggage rather than be defeated. To the uninitiated, this means that he went to East Orange on a freight train. He presented himself at Mr. Edison's laboratory and announced he had come to go into business with the inventor. In speaking of the first meeting between them years later, Mr. Edison said, "He stood there before me looking like an ordinary tramp. There was something in the expression on his face which conveyed the impression that he was determined to get what he'd come after. I had learned from years of experience with men that when a man really desires a thing so deeply that he is willing to stake his entire future on a single turn of the wheel in order to get it, he is sure to win. I gave him the opportunity he asked for because I saw he'd made up his mind to stand by until he succeeded. Subsequent events proved that no mistake was made." Just what young Barnes said to Mr. Edison on that occasion was far less important than what he thought. Edison himself said so. It could not have been the young man's appearance that got his first start in the Edison office, for that was definitely against him. It was what he thought that counted. If the significance of this statement could be conveyed to every person who reads it, there would be no need for the remainder of this book. Barnes did not get his partnership with Edison on his first interview. He did get a chance to work in the Edison offices at a very nominal wage, doing work that was unimportant to Edison, but most important to Barnes. It gave him an opportunity to display his merchandise where his intended partner could see it. Months went by. Apparently, nothing happened to bring the coveted goal, which Barnes had set up his mind as his definite major purpose. But something important was happening in Barnes's mind. He was constantly intensifying his desire to become the business associate of Edison. Psychologists have correctly said, when one is truly ready for a thing, it puts in its appearance. Barnes was ready for a business association with Edison. Moreover, he was determined to remain ready until he got that which he was seeking. He did not say to himself, "Oh, well, what's the use? I guess I'll change my mind and try for a salesman's job." But he did say, "I came here to go into business with Edison, and I'll accomplish this end if it takes the remainder of my life." And he meant it. What a different story people would have to tell if only they would adopt a definite purpose and stand by that purpose until it had time to become an all-consuming obsession. Maybe young Barnes did not know it at the time, but his bulldog determination, his persistence with a single desire, was destined to mow down all opposition and bring him the opportunity he was seeking. When the opportunity came, it appeared in a different form and from a different direction than Barnes had expected. That is one of the tricks of opportunity. It has a sly habit of slipping in by the back door and often comes disguised in the form of misfortune or temporary defeat. Perhaps this is why so many fail to recognize opportunity. Mr. Edison had just perfected a new office device, known at that time as the Edison dictating machine and later called the Ediphone. His salesmen were not enthusiastic over the machine. They did not believe it could be sold without great effort. Barnes saw his opportunity. It had crawled in quietly, hidden in a queer-looking machine that interested no one but Barnes and the inventor. Barnes knew he could sell the Edison dictating machine. He suggested this to Edison and promptly got his chance. He did sell the machine. In fact, he sold it so successfully that Edison gave him a contract to distribute and market it all over the nation. Out of that business association grew the slogan, made by Edison and installed by Barnes. This business alliance made Barnes rich in money, but he accomplished something infinitely greater. He proved that one really may think and grow rich. How much actual cash that original desire of Barnes was worth to him? I have no way of knowing. Perhaps it brought him $2 or $3 million. Whatever the amount, it becomes insignificant when compared with the greater asset he acquired. The definite knowledge that an intangible impulse of thought can be transmuted into its physical counterpart by the application of known principles. Barnes literally thought himself into a partnership with the great Edison. He thought himself into a fortune. He had nothing to start with, except the capacity to know what he wanted and the determination to stand by that desire until he realized it. He had no money to begin with. He had but little education. He had no influence, but he did have initiative, faith, and the will to win. And with these intangible forces, he made himself #1 man with the greatest inventor who ever lived. Now, let us look at a different situation and study a man who had plenty of tangible evidence of riches, but lost it because he stopped 3 feet short of the goal he was seeking. 3 feet from gold. One of the most common causes of failure is the habit of quitting when one is overtaken by temporary defeat. Every person is guilty of this mistake at one time or another. R.U. Darby, who later became one of the most successful insurance salesmen in the country, tells the story of his uncle who was caught by the gold fever in the gold rush days and went west to dig and grow rich. He had never heard the saying that more gold has been mined from the brains of men than has ever been taken from the earth. He staked a claim and went to work with pick and shovel. The going was hard, but his lust for gold was definite. After weeks of labor, he was rewarded by the discovery of the shining ore. He needed machinery to bring the ore to the surface. Quietly, he covered up the mine, retraced his footsteps to his home in Williamsburg, Maryland, and told his relatives and a few neighbors of the strike. They got together money for the needed machinery and had it shipped. The uncle and Darby went back to work with the mine. The first car of ore was mined and shipped to a smelter. The returns proved they had one of the richest mines in Colorado. A few more cars of that ore would clear the debts. Then would come the big killing in profits. Down went the drills. Up went the hopes of Darby and Uncle. And then something happened. The vein of gold ore disappeared. They had come to the end of the rainbow, and the pot of gold was no longer there. They drilled on, desperately trying to pick up the vein again, all to no avail. Finally, they decided to quit. They sold the machinery to a junk man for a few $100s and took the train back home. Some junk men are dumb, but not this one. He called in a mining engineer to look at the mine and do a little calculating. The engineer advised that the project had failed because the owners were not familiar with the fault lines. His calculations showed that the vein would be found just 3 feet from where the Darbys had stopped drilling. That is exactly where it was found. The junk man took millions of dollars in ore from the mine because he knew enough to seek expert counsel before giving up. Most of the money which went into the machinery was procured through the efforts of R.U. Darby, who was then a very young man. The money came from his relatives and neighbors because of their faith in him. He paid back every dollar of it, although he was years in doing so. Long afterwards, Mr. Darby recouped his loss many times over when he made the discovery that desire can be transmuted into gold. The discovery came after he went into the business of selling life insurance. Remembering that he lost a huge fortune because he stopped 3 feet from gold, Darby profited by the experience in his chosen work. His simple method was to say to himself, I stopped 3 feet from gold, but I will never stop because men say no when I ask them to buy insurance. He owes his stickability to the lesson he learned from his quitability in the gold mining business. Before success comes to most people, they're sure to meet with much temporary defeat and perhaps some failure. And when faced with defeat, the easiest and most logical thing to do is to quit. That is exactly what the majority of people do. More than 500 of the most successful people America has ever known told the author their greatest success came just one step beyond the point at which defeat had overtaken them. Failure is a trickster with a keen sense of irony and cunning. It takes great delight in tripping one up when success is almost within reach. A 50-cent lesson in persistence. Shortly after Mr. Darby received his degree from the University of Hard Knocks and had decided to profit by his experience in the gold mining business, he had the good fortune to be present on an occasion that proved to him that no does not necessarily mean no. One afternoon, he was helping his uncle grind wheat in an old-fashioned mill. The uncle operated a large farm on which a number of sharecrop farmers lived. Quietly, the door was opened, and a small child, the daughter of a tenant, walked in and took her place near the door. The uncle looked up, saw the child, and barked at her roughly. "What do you want?" Meekly the child replied, "My mammy says send her 50 cents. "I'll not do it," the uncle retorted. "Now you run on home." "Yes, sir," the child replied, but she did not move. The uncle went ahead with his work, so busily engaged he did not notice that the child had not left. And when he looked up and saw her still standing there, he yelled at her, "I told you, go on home. Now go, or I'll take a switch to you." The little girl said, "Yes, sir," but she did not budge an inch. The uncle dropped a sack of grain he was about to pour into the mill hopper, picked up a barrel stave, and started towards the child with an expression on his face that indicated trouble. Darby held his breath. He was certain he was about to witness a murder. He knew his uncle had a fierce temper. When the uncle reached the spot where the child was standing, she quickly stepped forward one step, looked up into his eyes, and screamed at the top of her shrill voice, "My mummy's going to have that 50 cents. The uncle stopped, looked at her for a minute, and then slowly laid the barrel stave on the floor, put his hand in his pocket, took out $50, and gave it to her. The child took the money and slowly backed towards the door, never taking her eyes off the man whom she had just conquered. After she had gone, the uncle sat down on a box and looked out the window into space for more than 10 minutes. He was pondering with awe on the whipping he had just taken. Mr. Darby, too, was doing some thinking. That was the first time in all his experience that he had seen the child of a sharecropper deliberately master an adult authority figure. How did she do it? What happened to his uncle that caused him to lose his fierceness and become as docile as a lamb? What strange power did this child use that made her master over her superior? These and other similar questions flashed into Darby's mind, but he did not find the answer until years later, when he told me the story. Strangely, the story of this unusual experience was told to the author in the old mill, on the very spot where the uncle took his whipping. As we stood there in that musty old mill, Mr. Darby repeated the story of the unusual conquest and finished by asking, "What can you make of it? What strange power did that child use that so completely whipped my uncle?" The answer to this question will be found in the principles described in this book. The answer is full and complete. It contains details and instructions sufficient to enable anyone to understand and apply the same force that the little child accidentally stumbled upon. Keep your mind alert, and you will observe exactly what strange power came to the rescue of the child. You will catch a glimpse of this power in the next chapter. Somewhere in the book, you will find an idea that will quicken your receptive powers and place at your command, for your own benefit, this same irresistible power. The awareness of this power may come to you in the first chapter, or it may flash into your mind in some subsequent chapter. It may come in the form of a single idea, or it may come in the nature of a plan or a purpose. Again, it may cause you to go back into your past experiences of failure or defeat and bring to the surface some lesson by which you can regain all that you've lost through defeat. After I described to Mr. Darby the power unwittingly used by the little child, he quickly retraced his 30 years of experience as a life insurance salesman. He frankly acknowledged that his success in that field was due in no small degree to the lesson he had learned from the child. Mr. Darby pointed out, Every time a prospect tried to bow me out without buying, I saw that child standing there in the old mill, her big eyes glaring in defiance. And I said to myself, I've got to make this sale. The better portion of all sales I have made were made after people had said no. He recalled, too, his mistake in having stopped only 3 feet from gold. But he said, that experience was a blessing in disguise. It taught me to keep on keeping on, no matter how hard the going may be. A lesson I needed to learn before I could succeed in anything. This story of Mr. Darby and his uncle, the sharecropper's child and the gold mine, will doubtless be read by hundreds of people who make their living by selling life insurance. To all of these, the author wishes to offer the suggestion that Darby owes to those 2 experiences his ability to sell more than $1 million of life insurance every year. Life is strange and often imponderable. Both the successes and the failures have their roots in simple experiences. Mr. Darby's experiences were commonplace and simple enough. Yet, as they held the answer to his destiny in life, they were as important to him as life itself. He profited by these 2 dramatic experiences because he analyzed them, and he found the lesson that they taught. But what of the person who has neither the time nor the inclination to study failure in search of knowledge that may lead to success? Where and how are they to learn the art of converting defeat into stepping stones to opportunity? In answer to these questions, this book was written. The answer called for a description of 13 principles. However, remember as you read that the answer you may be seeking to the questions which have caused you to ponder over the strangeness of life may be found in your own mind. Some idea, plan, or purpose may spring into your mind as you read. One sound idea is all you need to achieve success. The principles described in this book contain the best and most practical ways and means of creating useful ideas. Before we go any further in our approach to the description of these principles, we believe you are entitled to receive this important suggestion. When riches begin to come, they come so quickly, in such great abundance, that one wonders where they've been hiding during all those lean years. This is an astounding statement, and all the more so when we take into consideration the popular belief that riches come only to those who work hard and long. When you begin to think and grow rich, you will observe that riches begin with a state of mind, with definiteness of purpose, with little or no hard work. You and every other person ought to be interested in knowing how to acquire a state of mind that will attract riches. I spent 25 years in research, analyzing more than 25,000 people, because I too wanted to know how wealthy men become that way. Without that research, this book could not have been written. Here, take notice of a very significant truth. The business depression started in 1929 and continued on an all-time record of destruction until sometime after President Roosevelt entered office. Then the Depression began to fade into nothingness. Just as an electrician in a theater raises the lights so gradually that darkness is transmuted into light before you realize it, so did the spell of fear in the minds of the people gradually fade away and become faith. As soon as you master the principles of this philosophy and begin to follow the instruction for applying these principles, your financial status will happen to improve. It will begin to improve. Everything you touch will begin to transmute itself into an asset for your benefit. Impossible? No, not at all. One of the main weaknesses of mankind is the average person's familiarity with the word impossible. He knows all the rules that will not work. He knows all the things that cannot be done. This book was written for those who seek the rules that have made others successful and are willing to stake everything on those rules. A great many years ago, I purchased a fine dictionary. The first thing I did was turn to the word impossible and neatly clip it out of the book. That would not be an unwise thing for you to do. Success comes to those who become success conscious. Failure comes to those who indifferently allow themselves to become failure conscious. The object of this book is to help all who seek to learn the art of changing their minds from failure consciousness to success consciousness. Another weakness found in altogether too many people is the habit of measuring everything and everyone by their own impressions and beliefs. Some who read this will believe that no one can think and grow rich. They cannot think in terms of riches because their thought habits have been steeped in poverty, want, misery, failure, and defeat. Millions of people look at the achievements of Henry Ford and envy him his good fortune, or luck, or genius, or whatever it is that they credit for Ford's fortune. Perhaps one person in every 100,000 knows the secret of Ford's success. And those who do know are too modest or too reluctant to speak of it because of its simplicity. A single transaction will illustrate the secret perfectly. When Ford decided to produce his now famous V8 motor, he chose to build an engine with the entire 8 cylinders cast in one block and instructed his engineers to produce a design for the engine. The design was placed on paper, but the engineers believed it was simply impossible to cast an 8-cylinder gas engine block in one piece. Ford said, "Produce it anyway." But they replied, "It's impossible." "Go ahead," Ford commanded, "and stay on the job until you succeed, no matter how much time is required." The engineers went ahead. There was no other option if they were to remain on the Ford staff. 6 months went by and nothing happened. Another 6 months passed and still nothing happened. The engineers tried every conceivable plan to carry out the orders, but the thing seemed out of the question, impossible. At the end of the year, Ford checked with his engineers, and again they informed him they had found no way to carry out his orders. "Go right ahead," said Ford. "I want it, and I'll have it." They went ahead, and then, as if by a stroke of magic, the secret was discovered. The Ford determination had won once more. This story may not be described with minute accuracy, but the sum and substance of it is correct. Deduce from it, you who wish to think and grow rich, the secret of the Ford millions, if you can. You'll not have to look very far. Henry Ford is a success because he understands and applies the principles of success. One of these is desire, knowing what one wants. Remember this, the Ford story, remember it as you read, and pick out the lines in which the secret of his stupendous achievement has been described. If you can do this, if you can lay your finger on the particular group of principles that made Henry Ford rich, you can equal his achievements in almost any calling for which you are suited. The Henry Ford of the late 20th century was Bill Gates, and here we're going on with the modern version's addition to the book. Just as Ford revolutionized the transportation industry by creating a car that almost anyone could afford and drive, Bill Gates transformed the computer industry by designing software that enabled everybody, not just the specialized technocrats, to be able to use computers, and later making the personal computer a virtual necessity in every office, school, and home. This resulted in Bill Gates accruing billions of dollars and becoming the richest man in America. He first became entranced with computers and began programming them at the age of 13. In 1973, he entered Harvard University, where he'd lived down the hall from Steve Ballmer, now Microsoft's chief executive officer. While at Harvard, Gates developed a version of the programming language of BASIC, B-A-S-I-C, for the first microcomputer. Gates was so absorbed in his dream of building a software company that he left Harvard to devote his energies to fulfilling it. A few years earlier, he and his childhood friend Paul Allen had formed a company, Microsoft, as the vehicle for this endeavor. Guided by a belief that the computer would be a valuable tool on every office desktop and in every home, they began developing software for personal computers. Gates's foresight and his vision for personal computing have been central to the success of Microsoft and the software industry. Having achieved his major goal, Bill Gates continued to pursue new goals, both in the business of creating ever-improving computer programs and in his philanthropic work, having founded, with his wife Melinda, the largest charitable foundation in the world. And the original author goes on. You are the master of your fate, the captain of your soul. When the English poet W.C. Henley wrote the prophetic lines, I am the master of my fate, I am the captain of my soul, he should have informed us that the reason we are the masters of our fate, the captains of our souls, is because we have the power to control our thoughts. He should have told us that the ether in which this little planet floats, in which we move and have our being, is a form of energy, moving at an inconceivably high rate of vibration, and that the ether is filled with form of universal power, which adapts itself to the nature of thoughts we hold in our minds, and influences us in natural ways to transmute our thoughts into their physical equivalent. If the poet had told us of this great truth, we would know why it is that we are the masters of our fate, the captain of our souls. He should have told us, with great emphasis, that this power makes no attempt to discriminate between destructive and constructive thoughts, that it will urge us to translate into physical reality thoughts of poverty just as quickly as it will influence us to act upon thoughts of riches. He should have told us, too, that our brains become magnetized with the dominating thoughts we hold in our minds. By means with which no one is familiar, these magnets attract to us the forces, the people, the circumstances of life, which harmonize with the nature of our dominating thoughts. He should have told us that before we can accumulate riches in great abundance, we must magnetize our minds with intense desire for riches, that we must become money conscious until the desire for money drives us to create definite plans for acquiring it. But being a poet and not a philosopher, Henley contented himself by stating a great truth in poetic form, leaving those who followed him to interpret the philosophical meaning of his lines. Little by little, the truth has unfolded itself until it now appears certain that the principles described in this book hold the secret of mastery over our economic fate. And now I'm going to read another piece by the gentleman who, Mr. Pell, who has added his thoughts to this version of Think and Grow Rich. And he says, another man who exemplifies being master of his fate is Steven Spielberg, one of the all-time great motion picture directors. He dreamed of being a movie director from childhood. He began making amateur films with a primitive camera when he was still a child, and the dream never subsided. How Spielberg broke into Universal Studios is a legend in the movie industry. He took the Universal Studios tour, an attraction that enables visitors to get an inside look at the movie business. Visitors ride around the studio on a tram. Stephen sneaked off the tram and hid between two sound stages until the tour ended. When he left at the end of the day, he made a point of saying a few words to the gate guard. Day after day, he went back to the studio for 3 months. He walked past the guard, waved at him, and he waved back. He always wore a suit and carried a briefcase, letting the guard assume he was one of the students with a summer job in the studio. He made a point of speaking to and befriending directors, writers, and editors. He even found a vacant office, took it over, and listed his name in the building directory. He made it his business to get to know Sid Sheinberg, then head of production for the studio's television arm. He showed him his college film project, which so impressed Sheinberg that he put the young man under contract with the studio. His first full-length film, The Sugarland Express, received critical acclaim and won a Best Screenplay award at the 1974 Cannes Film Festival. Unfortunately, it did not do very well at the box office. His big break came a year later when he discovered the book Jaws. The studio had already decided to produce Jaws and had chosen a well-known director to film it. Spielberg desperately wanted to make this movie. Despite the financial failure of the Sugarland Express, his self-confidence had not diminished, and he persuaded the producers to dismiss the chosen director and give the film to him. It was not an easy assignment. From the beginning, trouble beset the production. It ran into technical and budget problems. However, when Jaws was released in June 1975, it enjoyed twofold success. It broke box office records, and The critics loved it. Within a month of its release, the film had taken in $60 million at the box office, an unheard of amount at the time. Over the next few years, Spielberg directed several movies, including the popular Indiana Jones series, the award-winning The Color Purple, Empire of the Sun, and E.T. He later directed Jurassic Park, which would also become, at its time, the most successful movie in history, the third Spielberg film to break the record. It also brought in over $1 billion in gross receipts, toys, and other merchandise. Spielberg continues to pursue his dreams. When he and two other Hollywood moguls created their own production company, they called it DreamWorks. And now to go on with Napoleon Hill. We are now ready to examine the first of these principles. Maintain a spirit of open-mindedness. Remember, as you read, that they are the invention of no single person. The principles were gathered from the life experiences of more than 500 men who actually accumulated riches in huge amounts. Men who began in poverty with little education or influence. The principles worked for these men. You can put them to work for your own enduring benefit. You will find it easy, not hard, to do. Before you read the next chapter, I want you to know that it conveys factual information that might easily change your entire financial destiny, as it has no definitely brought changes of as it has so definitely brought changes of stupendous proportions to two people described. I want you to know also that the relationship between these two men and myself is such that I could have taken no liberties with the facts, even if I had wished to do so. One of them has been my closest personal friend for almost 25 years. The other is my own son. The unusual success of these two men, success that they generously accredit to the principle described in the next chapter, more than justifies this personal reference as a means of emphasizing the far-flung power of this principle. Chapter 2 will be read at another time, and it is headed Desire, the starting point of all achievement, the first step to riches. And I will quite likely be returning next Saturday at 9 p.m. in the UK on Clubhouse to read chapter 2. I just want to thank those who've been listening to me read from Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill with the added commentary by, I'm just double checking his middle name, Dr. Arthur R. Pell. I just want to thank you so much for being with me as I read out loud from this amazing work and share with you as we all learn and grow together how we might lift and empower our lives. If anyone would like to come up to the stage to give any feedback, please feel free to put your hands up. Before I close the room, I invite any feedback or else send me any messages via direct messaging, either on Clubhouse or on Instagram. It's been such a pleasure being here together, and I want to thank those in the audience again for being here. And I'm looking forward to being with you again for another Holly Reads. And I think if the general consensus is that we should continue with this same book, that's what we'll do next Saturday. Otherwise, we might be reading a different book. So I look forward to receiving feedback about this. I just want to note that this book is written by an author who is not me, and it is revised and expanded by an author who is not me either. And I am taking the liberty of reading this book in good faith to an audience who are listening in good faith. Thank you all so much for being with me. It's been a real pleasure, and I'm going to close this room for now. Thank you to those who've just arrived, and we're about to close the room after counting down from 5. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Thank you so much, and goodbye for now. I'm Holly, and I'm done speaking.